My Democrat colleagues would tell the White House these nominees are unacceptable. This first nominee, Charnel Beckelgren, is so amazingly unqualified, she may well have the title for the least qualified nominee I've seen in 11 years serving on this committee. When Senator Kennedy asked her what Article 5 of the Constitution was, she had no idea. When Senator Kennedy asked her what Article 2 of the Constitution was, she said, I don't know. Mind you, Article 2 is the provision of the Constitution that creates the president and the executive branch of the government. Any first-year law student that didn't know what Article 2 of the Constitution was would flunk con law.
Wow. If you just watched that clip and your jaw isn't on the floor, I don't know what to tell you, because mine absolutely is. That was Senator Ted Cruz on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And whether you love him or hate him politically, what he just laid out is something every American should be paying attention to. Because this isn't really about politics. This is about basic competence. This is about whether the people being handed lifetime appointments to the most powerful courts in this country actually know what they're doing. And spoiler alert, some of them apparently do not. I've watched a lot of Senate hearings, and I will be honest with you, I was not prepared for a federal judge nominee to not know what Article 2 of the Constitution is. That's not a trick question. That's not deep legal philosophy. That is page 1, day 1 stuff. And she didn't know it. We're going to get into all of it. The driver's license lawyer, the Brady situation, and the one that genuinely made my stomach drop, Judge Gaston. You need to hear my full thoughts on that one. But before we do, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is exactly the kind of content we cover on this channel. Real, unfiltered reactions to what's actually happening in the halls of power. And if you think this video matters, share it. Send it to someone who needs to see it. This conversation needs to happen way beyond that committee room. All right, let's watch the whole thing, and then I'll give you every thought I have.
We have 2 or 3 nominations. Charnel B.L. Kindgren, nominated to the Eastern District of Washington. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on her nomination? Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to welcome our colleague, Senator Feinstein, back to this committee. But I will say what's going to happen next, I think, is going to be quite unfortunate for the American people. Because what we're about to see this committee do is vote on several nominees who are so extreme, who are so unqualified, that they could not have a prayer of getting even a single Republican vote on this committee. And as everyone knows, Senator Graham votes for most of Biden's nominees. It is unusual that Senator Graham does not give a Republican vote to a Biden nominee. But there's a small subset of these nominees that are so beyond the pale that they have no prayer of getting a Republican nominee. And frankly, if my Democrat colleagues valued the responsibility of the Senate's advise and consent, my Democrat colleagues would tell the White House these nominees are unacceptable. This first nominee, Charnel Beckelgren, is so amazingly unqualified, she may well have the title for the least qualified nominee I've seen in 11 years serving on this committee. When Senator Kennedy asked her what Article 5 of the Constitution was, she had no idea. When Senator Kennedy asked her what Article 2 of the Constitution was, she said, I don't know. Mind you, Article 2 is the provision of the Constitution that creates the president and the executive branch of the government. Any first-year law student that didn't know what Article 2 of the Constitution was would flunk con law. This is not some obscure question about some Latin phrase no one should know. This is literally the basic architecture of our Constitution. By the way, Joe Biden has nominated her to be an Article 3 judge. Article 3 is right after Article 2. It creates the federal judiciary. I assume she doesn't know what that is either. I would note that the chairman, in defending her, suggested, well, gosh, there may be some members of our committee that don't know what Article 2 is. I feel confident that's not true, but if there is on either side of the aisle, you should stand up and resign the committee right now. To give you a sense of how unqualified this nominee is, she listed in her judiciary questionnaire her top 10 litigated cases. I just want you to pause and read this for a second. Her top 10, she did a driver's license revocation. She did a second driver's license revocation. She did an unemployment benefits appeal. She did another unemployment benefits case. She did another unemployment benefit case. And her sixth case was an unemployment benefits case where on the opposing side was a pro se litigant. In other words, this poor fella didn't have a lawyer. And you know what? The pro se litigant beat her. She lost to a pro se litigant. What's her seventh most consequential case? I'm sorry, there isn't one. There's not an eighth, there's not a ninth, there's not a 10th. She's argued over a couple of driver's licenses. And the Biden White House says you should be a federal judge, an Article 3 judge, not that you have any idea what in the hell that is. In this administration, if you are a left-wing radical, it doesn't matter if you're competent. In Washington state, is there not a single competent lawyer who is competent to be a judge? And by the way, for all the Democrats, since Joe Biden has become president, every one of you has rubber-stamped every single nominee. Is there not a one of you that is willing to say enough is enough? When Donald Trump was president on the Republican side, we confirmed some fantastic judges, but there were several we sent back that we said, no, you missed it on this one. There's not even one Democrat willing to say enough is enough. And by the way, she's not the only one. Another one being considered, a nominee, Cruz. Thankfully not spelled C-R-U-Z, spelled C-R-E-W-S. When asked about Brady versus Maryland, one of the foundational criminal law classes, again, first-year criminal law, you learn about Brady. She said, I'm sorry, I don't know what Brady is. That'll be a problem if she's ever presiding over a criminal case. There are a number of members of this committee who have tried criminal cases. Do you know what Brady is? Of course you do. Because if you're remotely competent, you know what it is, not this judge. Look, sadly, the standard for nominees now seems to be licensed attorneys in Washington. Have you ever handled a criminal case? You ever tried a jury trial? Have you ever stepped foot in federal court? Well, then please contact Senate Democrats because you too can be a federal judge. I want to end with one more nominee that we're getting ready to ram through on party line votes. That is Judge Marian Gaston, nominated for a seat in San Diego. Judge Gaston, look, we've seen some radicals. We had a nominee earlier that this committee rubber stamped who said he woke up every morning motivated by his hatred for conservatives. Senate Democrats says, sounds like a judge to me. But let's see just how moonbat crazy we're willing to put on the bench. Here's a quote from Judge Gaston. Children are not safer because registered sex offenders are prohibited from residing near schools, parks, daycare centers, and other places where children tend to gather. And in fact, Judge Gaston continued, let's go to the next one. Judge Gaston continued, the conclusions and recommendations are that, difficult as it might be, so at least Judge Gaston recognizes this is pretty wingnut. The conclusion, laws that regulate where sex offenders may not live should be repealed or substantially modified in the interest of public safety. So I want you to understand the Joe Biden White House is saying a radical who wants sex offenders, who wants pedophiles to be able to live next door to daycares. That's who should be a federal judge. Look, some of y'all here represent blue states. Many of y'all represent blue states. I guarantee you in any one of your states. You go to Vermont, ask the people of Vermont, hey, what do you think about having a pedophile live next door to an elementary school, to a kindergarten, to a daycare? They'd look at you and say, are you out of your mind? That's who the Biden White House has given you. Now, I genuinely don't understand why Senate Democrats on this committee don't have enough respect for the constitutional role of the Senate to exercise some check and balance on the White House. I don't think they'll make you hand in your card-carrying Democrat cards to say, gosh darn it, we ought to have a judge who knows what the heck he's doing. John Kennedy has left bloody carcasses in this hearing from Trump nominees who didn't have sufficient experience to do the job. I ask my colleagues, if you vote for these nominees, you're going to have to defend them to your constituents. You're going to have to explain why a lawyer who handled a couple of driver's license revocations and doesn't know what Article 2 of the Constitution is should be a federal judge in charge of your life, your rights, and the law. And you're going to have to explain why you think it's a great idea that sex offenders and pedophiles should live next door to daycare centers. I think that's nuts. And I think most of our constituents do too.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lee.
Okay, now you've seen the full thing. I want to be thoughtful here because it's easy to just react emotionally. So let me give you my honest take, because this deserves more than outrage. First, Cruz's delivery. Say what you want about him politically, and I know opinions run the full spectrum, but in that room he was sharp and he was prepared. He came in with receipts. He had the questionnaire, the quotes, the specific questions that were asked, and the answers that were given. That is a senator doing his homework, and that's what we should expect from all of them. Now, Charnel Beckelgren. I want to be fair. Nobody deserves to be publicly humiliated, and a Senate hearing is a high-pressure environment. But Article 2 of the Constitution. Come on. We're not talking about some obscure legal precedent. We are talking about the founding document of this country, the article that literally creates the presidency. If you are being nominated for a lifetime federal judgeship, that is the absolute floor of what you should know walking in the door. And then the case history. I keep coming back to this because it tells the real story. Driver's license revocations, unemployment appeals, 6 cases, and then it just stops. No federal court experience, no jury trials, nothing. And the White House looked at that resume and said, yes, this is our person for a lifetime appointment. That decision deserves serious scrutiny, and Cruz was right to put it on the record. Then there's Cato Cruz and Brady versus Maryland. For anyone who doesn't know, Brady is one of the most cited cases in all of criminal law. It establishes that prosecutors must hand over evidence that could help the defense. It comes up in virtually every criminal proceeding. It is not advanced material. It is criminal law 101. If you do not know what Brady is, you cannot preside over a criminal trial. That's not a political opinion. That's just reality. And then we get to Judge Marion Gaston. This is the one I want to spend time on because I think it's the most serious. I understand that legal scholars debate sex offender residency laws. There are legitimate academic conversations about what actually keeps communities safe. I get that nuance exists, but here's my issue. When you are being nominated to a lifetime federal judgeship, your published positions matter. And a published position that laws keeping sex offenders away from schools, parks, and daycares should be repealed, that is an extraordinary position, and it demands extraordinary scrutiny. Cruz asked the question every parent watching that hearing was thinking, and he was right to ask it. And this is really what I want to leave you with. This should not be a partisan issue. The Senate's advise and consent role exists for a reason. It is a check. It is supposed to be the moment where someone asks, is this person truly ready for this responsibility? Federal judges serve for life. These are not 4-year appointments. Once they're confirmed, they're in. What frustrated me most is the point Cruz made near the end. When Trump was president, Republicans did push back on some of his nominees. They sent some back. Is there not a single Democrat on that committee willing to do the same? Because if the answer is no, that is not loyalty to your party. That is a failure of your constitutional duty. You deserve judges who know the Constitution. You deserve judges who know foundational case law. You deserve judges whose positions reflect at least a baseline concern for public safety. That should not be controversial. And the fact that asking for it out loud generates this much pushback tells you a lot about where we are right now. Cruz put it on the record. Now it's on all of us to pay attention. That's my take. Drop yours in the comments. Do you think Cruz was out of line, or did he hit the nail on the head? Let's talk about it. If you found this valuable, please like it, share it, and subscribe. It helps this channel keep covering the stuff that matters. I'll see you in the next one.